Syracuse Basketball is going after the number one player in the country in the class of 2027 and are also pursuing several five-star recruits in the class of 2026.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, it's another Syracuse basketball recruiting episode, but this time we're going over the class of 2026 and even the class of 2027. In fact, we're going to start off with the class of 2027, but only because Syracuse basketball has recently offered the number one player in the country. So who knows? Could Syracuse basketball get another number one high school basketball recruit to come? The last person that was number one overall was Carmelo Anthony in 2002. So tons to look forward to on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so let's start off by discussing that Syracuse basketball has recently offered the number one overall player in the country in the class of 2027. His name is Babatunde Oladotun. He is 6'8", 180 pounds. He is a forward. He is from Silver Spring, Maryland. And I'm going to tell you why that's significant in a second. And as I have mentioned already numerous times, the number one overall player in the country. Now, he has obviously tons of interest elsewhere, and I imagine the interest is going to continue to grow considering he's class of 2027. That is a ways away from ever making an impact in college because it's 2027. We're only in 2024 right now, but it is significant that he is the best player in the country. Teams that have already offered him as well include, but are not limited to, Michigan, Rutgers, USC, UCLA, Tennessee, and West Virginia. So a couple California schools, some Midwest schools. Who knows? It's class of 2027. It's a ways away, but he is the number one player in the country. I mentioned that he is from Silver Spring, Maryland, and I said that that's important, and I am now going to tell you why that's important. In case you are not familiar, there are several recruiting hotbeds for Syracuse basketball. And really, it's two. It's two main hotbeds for Syracuse, one of which is the Northeast, right? So you got the New York kids, New Jersey. I know Matthew Gilhool in the class of 2025, which, by the way, he's going to be cutting down his list very shortly. He is from Philly, so that area, anywhere in the Northeast, Syracuse basketball likes to recruit from there, and it makes sense. Geography, it's close to the school and everything. Makes sense. The other one is Maryland, Virginia, otherwise known as the DMV area. That is where they love to recruit as well. You guys know Donnie Freeman, right? The number 6 overall player in the country in the class of 2024. He's heading to Syracuse, obviously. I can't wait to watch him play, and you should too. He should have high expectations considering what most number 6 overall players are. Donnie Freeman from the DMV area. But it's not just Donnie Freeman in recent times. Judah Mintz is also a DMV guy. He worked out pretty well. Benny Williams, I know it didn't work out, but he was a highly touted prospect from the DMV area. And Woody Newton, I know it didn't work out with him either, but he was a 4-star recruit out of high school from the DMV area. Those are just guys since 2020. You got 4 since 2020 from the DMV area. It's significant that the number 1 overall player in the country is from the DMV area. That's a Syracuse basketball recruiting hotbed. You actually have a chance at landing this kid. Now, having said that, coaches cannot speak to these players directly in the class of 2027 until June 15th of next year. So you're looking at 10 and a half months until Syracuse basketball can directly contact him, or at least the coaches can directly contact him. But it's still important that you show interest early and why I applaud Syracuse for already extending an offer because, hey, these kids, these highly touted prospects, you want to get in on them as soon as possible. I told you guys the trend that I'm noticing with Syracuse football in the class of 2025 and the class of 26. In the class of 2026, they are getting some of the best players in the country. Not just like, he's one of the best in New York or anything. Like, no. Like Isaiah Williams is a 5-star recruit in football. Demetrius Samuel was a top 80 overall player in the country. And the other kid, Deontay Sheffy, is a running back, a 4-star recruit. Those are some of the best players in the country. The reason why they were able to get those kids in the class of 2026, but haven't gotten them yet in the class of 2025, in my opinion, it's because Syracuse was late to the party for those really, really elite kids in the class of 2025. They were late to the party, and it makes a lot of sense considering they never used to have a seat at the table with Dino Babers. So you get a new coaching staff. And Fran Brown is doing his best, and he's getting a lot of quantity in his recruits. But in terms of the elite players, the point being is that with these ultra elite players in the country, you have to get in on them as soon as possible to try to build that relationship, because there are two things that really it's three things for recruits when it comes to picking a school. It's comfort, right? Are you comfortable where you're at? It's the relationships that you have built. So that's two things already. And number three, money. Money is obviously important. NIL money talks. Player salaries talk, right? Colleges can now pay players. But you got to build relationships as soon as you possibly can. So at the very least, you can get into the discussion of how much money it's going to take. You have to try to get into the discussion. The only way you can get in discussion is if you build a relationship with, which is exactly what Syracuse basketball is doing with Babatunde Oladotun, the number 1 overall player in the class of 2027. As far as the history of number 1 overall players that have committed to Syracuse, I know 3 off the top of my head. Carmelo Anthony in 2002 was a number 1 overall player in the country. Derek Coleman in 1986, number 1 overall player. And Pearl Washington in 1983 was the number 1 overall player. But that's the only 3 that I know of. There might be more, but at least those 3, Carmelo, Coleman, Pearl, all number 1 overall recruits in their respective high school classes. Now, obviously, it's 2027. The recruiting rankings can change quite a bit recently, or they can change quite a bit. But Syracuse is showing interest for now in the number 1 overall player in the class of 2027. And they have a legitimate chance. He's from the DMV area. It's still a ways away, but from the DMV area, you're showing interest now. You might be able to get yourself a seat at the table come the money discussions and really when the recruitment time really starts to pick up on the class of 2027. So they're showing interest. That's good. Now coming up, we talk about the players that Syracuse basketball is interested in the class of 2026. They're not going after the number 1 overall player, but they are going after a few 5-star recruits. It's one thing to watch baseball on TV. That at times can get pretty boring, but going to a game in person is an awesome experience, and I'm looking forward to doing it this summer. Now that the New York Mets are actually in contention, and the way I'm going to watch the Mets in person is using Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. All you have to do is go to Gametime and search the team you want to see of your choosing. Can be MLB or any league for that matter, and ticket options will appear right away. My favorite part is the all-in pricing feature. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are going over Syracuse basketball recruiting. We talked about 2025 yesterday. In fact, we've talked about 2025 numerous times here on the podcast, so if you haven't checked out those videos, I highly suggest checking them out after this podcast. For now, we're going over the fact that Syracuse offered the number one player in the class of 2027. He's from the DMV area, so they got a shot. And now let's talk about the offers in the class of 2026. Let's start off with the 5 stars, and then later on we'll get to the 4 stars. So by my count, Syracuse has offered 8 players in the class of 2026, 3 5 stars, 5 4 stars. Let's start off with the 5 stars, as I mentioned, and Jordan Smith, 6'3", 175-pound guard from Fairfax, Virginia. That's the DMV region right there, right? A 5-star recruit, top 10 in the country on 24/7 Sports, ESPN, and Rivals. One of the more elite players in the country, top 10 overall. He was offered by Syracuse in late May, and he is currently playing for USA Basketball U17 in the FIBA World Cup. And Syracuse coaches are watching him at that tournament. And this is also kind of important because I mentioned how it's important to take an interest in these kids and to show that you're interested. Well, this FIBA tournament is in Turkey. It's in Turkey. Syracuse coaches flew to Turkey to watch Jordan Smith play. That shows they are very much interested. That gives you a thumbs up, Syracuse basketball. Good job. This is the stuff that it's nothing against Turkey. Nothing against Turkey. It's just that's a long flight. That's a long trip. And you're doing it to see a basketball player? Props to you. Props to Syracuse on that. Now, obviously, he is one of the more highly touted prospects. The good news is he did take an unofficial visit to Syracuse early last month. And other offers include Villanova, Michigan, Arizona State, Florida, Maryland, Georgetown. They still suck, and plenty of more. So Jordan Smith, highly sought after, but Syracuse has already gotten him on campus, and the coaches are clearly interested in him, given that they just flew to Turkey. Moving on, we got another 5-star recruit here in Alex Constanza, 6'8", 205-pound forward from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He is a 5-star recruit, as I mentioned. Top 5 player in the country over on On3. So that's the highest they have him. Top 5 in the country. He was offered by Syracuse in January and is, quote, highly interested in visiting Syracuse. This is coming from Neil Adler at Inside the Loud House. Alex Constanza in an interview said that he describes himself as a 3-level scorer and someone who can guard and play multiple positions on the floor. So this is a very versatile kid. Other schools in pursuit include, not limited to, Florida schools, given that he is from Florida. That's my neck of the woods, so all the Florida schools involved. Auburn, Louisville, Georgia, Dayton, Oregon, and St. John's. So a lot of schools in pursuit of Alex Constanza. He's a 5-star recruit. Makes a lot of sense. Next up, we got Deron Rippey Jr., 6'2", 175-pound guard from Blairstown, New Jersey. Not the DMV area, but still in the Northeast. That's where Syracuse likes to recruit as well. He is a 24/7 Sports composite 5-star recruit. He was offered by Syracuse last August, and he took an official visit to the Orange last February. He plans to officially visit as well, according to Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House. So if they've already gotten an unofficial with him and he plans on taking an official, this is someone I would really keep your eye on, Deron Rippey Jr. In a recent interview with Sports Illustrated, Deron Rippey said, quote, I really like how they've been keeping in touch. It means a lot to me, honestly. So what does that tell you? Building relationships, staying in touch is one of the main keys to getting these elite players and really any player to come play for you. He has heard from many schools as well, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Virginia, so plenty of ACC schools, but also schools like Auburn, Michigan, and Rutgers. These are 5-star recruits. These are some of the best players in the country. Syracuse is going to have competition if they want to land these players. So the 5-star recruits that Syracuse is after in the class of 2026, Jordan Smith from the DMV area, Alex Constanza from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so my neck of the woods, and Deron Rippey Jr. from New Jersey, so the Northeast, another recruiting hotbed for Syracuse basketball. So those are the 5-star recruits that Syracuse is after, but they're still after some 4-star recruits as well. So coming up, we talk about them. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. On today's show, it's Syracuse basketball recruiting once again, but we've gone over the class of 2025 plenty of times here on the podcast so far, and don't worry, I'm still going to cover it plenty more times here on the podcast, especially when the activity really starts to heat up with the class of 2025. But today, I wanted to bring your attention to the other years coming down the line, the fact that Syracuse offered the number 1 player in the country, some of the 5-star recruits that Syracuse offered in the class of 2026. To mention the number 1 overall player was in the class of 2027. So getting my years mixed up. Point being, we're looking down the line here. Now let's talk about the 4-star recruits that Syracuse basketball has offered in the class of 2026. Beginning with Anthony Brown, 6'1", 160-pound guard from Fairfax, Virginia, DMV area, and I believe the same high school. He attends the same high school as Jordan Smith. He is a 4-star on ESPN, and he was offered by Syracuse in late May. He does want to take an official visit to the Orange, according to Neil. So shout out Neil for getting this information. His father also told Neil in an interview, quote, he loves the history of the program and the DMV connection. So again, he likes the history of Syracuse. That's good and dandy, but the DMV connection is what really matters here. I'm telling you guys, that is a huge hotbed for Syracuse basketball recruiting. So the fact that he is even pointing it out, it means that Syracuse coaches have been in his ear telling him about it. Plenty of recruits have come from the DMV area, so it's significant that Anthony Brown pointed it out. So Anthony Brown could be heading his way to Syracuse, maybe. It's too early to tell, though. Before I get to the next recruit, he has offers from George Mason, Norfolk State, and Providence. Now let's move on to Maximo Adams, 6'6", 180-pound forward from Gardena, California. He is a consensus 4-star recruit, ranked as high as 23rd in the country over on Rivals. He was offered by Syracuse last February. He's got plenty of schools that are in pursuit of him, including West Coast schools like USC, Oregon, and BYU. Here's what I would say. It's not impossible for Syracuse to get a kid from California. In fact, the Orange did that with Chris Bell. Chris Bell came from California, and that's just one that came off the top of my head. He's from California. But West Coast, Florida, as I mentioned with Alex Constanza, those are not really the hotbeds for Syracuse basketball recruiting. Not to say that you can't get a kid from there. It's just that those are not the main areas of focus typically for Syracuse basketball. It's the DMV area and it's the Northeast typically. But still, Maximo Adams should be on your radar, especially because back in November, and I know it was a long time ago, so I don't know if it's still true or not, he did have Syracuse in his top 5 list of schools. So a lot has happened since November. Maybe it has changed. I don't know. I shouldn't say a lot has happened. A lot of time has passed. So things could have obviously changed with that. Moving on to another 4-star recruit, we got Neiko Mundey. 6'1", 165-pound guard from Olney, Maryland, which is obviously in the DMV area. That's also where Syracuse men's lacrosse beat North Carolina a couple years ago in a neutral site game. If you recall, Michael Leo scored the game-winning goal with about 12 seconds left. I actually covered that game on the sideline, so I know that high school a little bit. Old Good Counsel, I think is what its name is, and he's from Olney, Maryland, so that's cool. That's just a coincidence. He is a 4-star recruit everywhere except for on 3. He was offered by Syracuse last August, and he has taken an unofficial visit to Syracuse, and it was around the same time as the offer. I don't know if the offer came, then an unofficial visit, or if it was the other way around. But the point being, he got an unofficial visit and he got a scholarship offer at basically the same time. So Neiko Mundey, maybe he could be on his way to. Again, it's so early to tell with where he's going, but they got him on campus at the very least. Other schools that are involved, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Florida. But again, he's from the DMV area, so that's a Syracuse recruiting hotbed. You're not going to get all the kids, but keep your eye on Neiko Mundey. Another one to point out here is Imahri Wooten, 6'4", 180-pound guard from Troy, New York. So Northeast, that's important. He is a 4-star recruit everywhere except for on-3, just like Neiko Mundey. I believe he was offered in last October. Like, I know he has an offer, but I believe he was offered in October and also unofficially visited Syracuse. So Imahri Wooten has unofficially visited Syracuse and does, at the very least, have an offer from the Orange. He has said, and I'm paraphrasing this, I believe he interviewed with Sports Illustrated as well, that he enjoyed his conversations with Coach Autry. Again, that's super important. I know it might sound repetitive at times, but I cannot understate how important it is to build relationships and not necessarily coddle the kids. You don't want to coddle them, but at the same time, you want to make them feel special. You want them to feel wanted. You got to show that you're interested. Like Deron Rippey Jr., I want to say, was the one I would talk about, like how he was very happy that Syracuse has been in contact with him for so long. I talked about with Jordan Smith, how the coaches literally flew to Turkey to watch him play basketball. And again, nothing against Turkey, but that is a long trip to make. The fact that they're flying to Turkey to go see him just shows you just how interested they are. You might not get him. But at the very least, you might have a seat at the table. Imahri Wooten, other schools interested include Penn State, Auburn, and Georgia Tech. Now let's move on to Prince-Alexander Moody, a 6'4" guard from District Heights, Maryland, DMV area. Notice, I can't point it out enough how many of these kids are from that area. Virginia, Maryland. It's basically where Syracuse basketball does much of its recruiting. Donnie Freeman, Judah Mintz, Benny Williams, Woody Newton. You get the idea by now. If you haven't, now maybe you know. Just areas to Syracuse basketball. Prince-Alexander Moody is a consent. He does hold a Syracuse offer. Don't know when it was offered, but he does at the very least have one. And he did unofficially visit the school back in August. So another unofficial visit there. I don't know if there's an official visit in the works, but Prince-Alexander Moody should be on your radar because Syracuse at least got him on campus and is from the DMV area. Having said that, let's go over once again the 8 players that Syracuse basketball, to my knowledge, has offered in the class of 2026. 3 5-stars, Jordan Smith, Alex Constanza, and Deron Rippey Jr. So those are the 3 5-stars. And then 5 4-star recruits. We got Anthony Brown, Maximo Adams, Neiko Mundey, Imahri Wooten, and Prince-Alexander Moody. A total of 8 once again, many of which coming from the Northeast, many of which coming from the DMV area, recruiting hotbeds for Syracuse basketball, and hopefully they can land a couple of these kids. It's at very least, it's good that they are showing interest in them because you have no chance if you're not showing interest. Shouldn't say no chance. Your odds of getting these really, really good players go drastically down the later you get involved in the process. You got to get involved as soon as you can in order to have the best chance. Now, having said that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. Tomorrow might be another football episode, or if some news breaks, maybe I'll cover the news, obviously. Who knows? But I'll be back tomorrow with another podcast for y'all.